So I watched Onward in theaters and it was bad. As soon as it was over, I felt it had the good dinosaur levels of emptiness. I immediately forgot everything that happened, and this movie flew pretty under the radar. I would pay to see how it would have done had there not been any disruptions with it showing in the theaters. I used to consider Pixar to be the model company for taking simple concepts or lessons and telling them in the most interesting, thought-provoking ways. With that criteria in mind, let me explain why Onward isn't a Pixar movie. To better prove how poorly put together Onward is, I'll be comparing its cliches to previous Pixar movies to see how they were handled in any of these far better films. So we begin with some narration spoken directly to the audience, which is by far the worst kind. Yes, I know the dialogue is coming from a letter Ian reads later, but because it's read straight to us the first time, this is just poor repetition. A lot of Pixar movies do start off with narration, but they work it into real-world conversations. If there's exposition to be shared, it's done by someone in-universe. Ratatouille does it by showing it on TV, The Incredibles by a news report, and Monsters, Inc. gets across how this world works in under 10 minutes and by having the characters explain it to each other. Simple solution for Onward would have been to just let them learn this in school. It would have established this as a proper location that gets reincorporated later and wouldn't have felt so forced. And oh my gosh, are these characters hideous. It looks like the characters themselves applied blue body paint all over. Their skin looks so off. I am bothered by it the entire movie. At least in The Good Dinosaur, they spent time on the backgrounds. The characters are still hideous in that movie, and the contrast between that and the great landscapes is a little distracting, but I can remember specific scenes because they're visually interesting. I can't recall a single scene or even a shot at Onward that is memorable. I can tell they tried to make those moments, but I'm not invested enough to care. Problem is, this world is just so visually uninspired. There is no benefit to them being elves. These could be human characters in any city background and it wouldn't change the story one bit. It took me a solid minute to try and recall the name of this place, but P. Sherman 42 Wallaby Way, Sydney, Paradise Falls, Gusteau's. I remember these names because they make the locations important. Not only is the name New Mushroomton incredibly juvenile, they don't spend time interacting with this world at all. Why even bother saying magic used to exist here? They should have made it a full-on fantasy world or a completely modern setting. I don't think the story would have been disturbed at all if they went either of these ways. It only seems like they went the way they did so they can make these one-note jokes about how things have changed. But these jokes don't go very far, and halfway into the movie they stop. The payoff for these creatures going back to the way things used to be doesn't feel earned because they never really explored the world in the first place. And if they were trying to get across a message about how technology shouldn't run our lives or we need to stay true to who we are, they didn't fully get through to the audience because a lot of the creatures seem to remain the same. The fairies still have an attitude problem, and they still live in a technology-reliant setting. In Monsters, Inc., they make a drastic change to their world by the end, switching from scaring kids to making them laugh, but not only did they have to make that change, which better justifies the switch, they constantly drop hints that they're going in that direction. They learn pretty early on that laugh is more powerful than scream, whereas in Onward, for example, the Manticore constantly complains about how she can't fly, and she just up and does it by the end. I knew from the start though that Onward was going to have so many problems because from the first trailer they already checked off so many cliches. A 24-hour time limit, characters that are polar opposites, and we see a lot more throughout the movie that are laid out just as bluntly. Plenty of other Pixar films have these cliches, but they work them into the story so you can hardly tell they're present. For example, our first cliche, having a time limit. This cliche can be lessened if your time limit comes along sometime during the adventure. Carl starts working faster because the balloons start popping, Marlin races through the ocean after his son gets taken away, Buzz and Woody need to return home before Andy moves. Pretty much every movie has some sort of clock they're racing against, and some films are more subtle than others. Onward is not one of those movies. It continually shows us an actual clock that is counting down. Other Pixar movies were able to create a sense of urgency naturally, but Onward continually beats you over the head with it. Second cliche, characters that are polar opposites. The genuineness in their interactions is removed because the characters always need to stick to their cliche personality traits. Barley is tough yet goofy, Ian is awkward yet ambitious. Their connection isn't genuine because they don't seem to be learning from each other. Because of this, I don't root for anyone. It doesn't feel like they're growing after each step of the adventure besides learning the actual task at hand. One of the best things about Pixar, there are many unique and memorable characters. Even if one character follows a trope a little too closely, they're always balanced out perfectly by someone else. The Incredibles does this by creating a strong family dynamic, and Marlin and Dory learn things from each other throughout the entire movie. It doesn't just come at them at once. You can see parts of each of their personalities blend together. In Onward, I don't feel like Ian is becoming that much tougher by learning from Barley, and Barley isn't any more gentle or reserved like Ian. Also, Ian straight up stole Linguini's personality and his face. But Linguini was just a lovable doofus. Pixar goes too far now because they think making a character more awkward automatically makes them more relatable, but it just becomes uncomfortable and unnatural. Third cliche, misunderstanding between characters. Oh man, do I hate moments of misunderstanding, and this one is so disingenuous. Not only has Barley hardly been shown to be a character with insecurities, so this kind of comment shouldn't bother him, but this wasn't a real problem until this moment. If they wanted us to take this scene seriously, they would have had a scene early in the movie where Ian confronts him about this. There is never any build up to the conflicts they introduce or the solutions. And my last cliche, a missing parent. Obviously, everyone knows this trend is present in every Disney movie, but I feel like Onward hardly does anything to tackle the emotional resonance of losing a parent. They keep talking about physically bringing their dad back, but we don't see a lot of how his absence affects them. The reason Ian wants to meet him doesn't go any deeper than him saying that he wants to. In Up, Carl's wife passes and it changes his personality and attitude towards life. The only time their dad gets mentioned is in some really forced conversations. If a total stranger tried to bring up a relative's passing this way, I'd be pretty turned off. Why can't Pixar write normal sounding dialogue anymore? So they clearly didn't care enough to try and break down each of these cliches so they could feel natural. That and the fact that their lazy writing creates more problems, like how this movie is incredibly predictable. They lay out a map for where they need to go and follow it to a T. There aren't any interesting characters or obstacles that come up like they do in Finding Nemo. And there aren't any plot twists that add to the conflict like Monsters, Inc. has. They constantly talk about this curse and how terrible it is that the main characters weren't informed about it, but it turns out to be incredibly underwhelming. This isn't a threatening fight at all. In fact, there aren't any real problems that happen to the characters along the way. They travel totally unbothered throughout their journey. Besides some personal conflicts, nothing happens to them to make any of this feel suspenseful. This movie's sub-story is boring and so unnecessary. The mom is following the exact same path as them, so nothing she does is interesting. She's just repeating a lot of information we already know. In Finding Nemo, which I keep mentioning because I think it's the most perfect of the Pixar films, they jump back from Marlin and Nemo at the best times to allow their stories to contrast each other. Marlin is moving through the grand scale of the ocean while Nemo's confined to this small tank. Onward's two plots don't weave together nearly that well. Everyone was praising this movie for being super emotional, and if you have a connection with it, then all the power to you. However, I watched it with my dad and older brother, the two main relationships Onward covers, and I felt nothing new from my family after watching this. Ian's decision totally comes out of nowhere. He comes to the conclusion at the end that he is a father figure in Barley since he's always taken care of him, but I don't think he even gave off big brother vibes. Again, it hardly seems like they learned from each other throughout the movie, and yet they still have Ian literally check off the boxes for all that Barley has done for him. The only genuine glimpse we get into their lives is from a 20-second flashback. Up until this montage, he doesn't do anything for Ian throughout this journey that makes him fit for this parental role. Not to mention, we found out just 13 minutes ago that Barley had this guilt for not saying goodbye to his dad, a fact that would have added so much more emotional weight to the story. I don't feel like any of the characters have a strong relationship. They straight up have no relationship with the stepdad at all. I don't know why he's there. They could have just had this role be filled by any random cop. It makes no difference that he knows them. In fact, all of the side characters do nothing. In Finding Nemo, each side character helps Marlin and Dory move forward in their adventure by sharing some important information with them. But Ian and Barley always just take care of things themselves until they get to their perfectly tied up ending. And you usually repeat dialogue at the end of a movie after experiencing some type of growth to show how the meaning has changed, but it hardly feels like anything of importance has transpired. Pixar just doesn't make movies like they used to. Disney in general is all about pumping out the next piece of garbage that's easily marketable and can be distributed among the masses. As long as it has their name on it, people will force themselves to believe it's good. I wish I could say more about this movie, but it is so full of nothing. It will leave you feeling empty, bored, and like you just wasted a solid hour and a half of your life. If you want to watch a good Pixar film, skip this and go back to when Pixar was in their prime.